He always treated her as invisible, until a single photo made everything inside him crumble, and the man who ignored her discovered the bitter taste of jealousy. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Now, continuing our story. Silence had become the third resident of that luxury penthouse in the Canary Wharf area of London. Marcia watched from the 25th floor window the frenetic movement of the city that never slept, while her husband Edward leafed through documents in his private office, as if she were just another expensive piece of furniture in the decor. 15 years of marriage had transformed into a cold choreography of appearances, where each knew their role without ever questioning the script. She vaguely remembered the woman she once was. Marcia Stone, daughter of an East End electrician and a primary school teacher, graduated with honours in architecture from University College London, UCL, specialising in sustainable projects. Her social housing projects had gained national recognition before she met Edward at a business awards ceremony. Now at 42, her drawing boards gathered dust while she posed for photos at charity events, smiling automatically beside her husband, who introduced her as my wife in the same way he would mention a valuable property. Edward Montrose was not just rich, he was a force of nature disguised as a man. President of the Commercial Court of London, his word shaped the destiny of billion-pound companies, and his influence extended far beyond the courts. Son of a traditional London family, heir to law firms and investments, Edward had built an empire based on the respectful fear he inspired. At 50, he maintained an erect posture and a penetrating gaze that made experienced lawyers sweat cold in his presence. At home, however, this force transformed into an absence so absolute it was disconcerting. On that rainy Thursday in June, Marcia received a phone call that would yank her out of the paralysis she was living in. Sandra, her former partner and only true friend, called in desperation. "Marcia, I need your help. The New Haven project has been approved and they want to present the first phase at the inauguration of the new Sterling Group development. It's tonight at the Grand Hyatt. I know you don't want anything to do with architecture anymore, but please." Marcia stared at her own reflection in the window glass. When was the last time someone needed her professionally? When was the last time she felt useful for something beyond smiling in photographs? "I'll go," she said, and the firmness in her own voice surprised her. The Grand Hyatt in London buzzed that night with the most powerful figures in the British business scene. Marcia arrived wearing an elegant but unpretentious black outfit, carrying the portfolio with projects she hadn't opened in months. She had no idea that that night would split her life in two, forever dividing it into a before and an after. Edward was there naturally. As president of the court that regulated large developments, his presence was almost mandatory. Marcia saw him from afar, surrounded by the usual circle of sycophants and opportunists, and for the first time, she didn't automatically head towards him. Instead, she sought out Sandra and lost herself in the presentation of the architectural projects she had planned years earlier and which were finally coming to life. It was there, passionately explaining the concepts of sustainability and social integration of her projects to a small group of investors, that she rediscovered herself. Her hands gesticulated animatedly while she described how every detail had been thought out to humanize hostile urban spaces. Her eyes shone with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. Across the room, Edward watched her, unable to concentrate on the conversation about corporate mergers happening around him. In those 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Marcia like this, vibrant, passionate, alive. A strange unease began to grow in his chest, something he couldn't name or control. "Who is that woman?" he asked discreetly to the lawyer beside him, pointing with his chin in Marcia's direction. "Marcia Stone, a brilliant architect. Her projects are a benchmark in sustainable social architecture. They say she's married to someone very influential, but prefers to stay out of the limelight." Edward swallowed hard. 15 years, living with a stranger. Marcia's conversation was interrupted when a tall man approached the group. Daniel Foster was 45, a civil engineer trained at Imperial College London and CEO of Foster Construction, one of the country's largest construction companies. Unlike the other businessmen present, Daniel had a more relaxed, almost rebellious air that contrasted with the formal environment. His slightly disheveled hair and easy smile made him a magnetic presence. "Excuse me for interrupting," Daniel said, fixing his eyes on Marcia, "but I couldn't help but overhear about the social integration projects. Marcia, isn't it? Your concepts remind me of Hassan Fathi's work in Egypt." Marcia blushed slightly. It was rare to find someone who knew the architectural references that inspired her. "You know his work?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Architecture for the Poor? A classic. I read it during my degree, and it changed the way I think about civil construction. I've always wanted to work with someone who truly understood those principles." Edward watched the scene from afar, a strange feeling growing in his chest. Was it jealousy? Impossible. He had never felt jealous of Marcia. In fact, he had barely noticed her for years. The conversation between Marcia and Daniel flowed naturally. He was intelligent, humorous, and, most importantly, interested in her ideas in a way she had forgotten was possible. When he invited her to dance, she hesitated only a second before accepting. On the dance floor, Daniel was surprisingly graceful for a man of his stature. He guided her with confidence but delicacy, and Marcia found herself relaxing in his arms in a way she hadn't in years. "May I make a confession?" Daniel said, moving slightly closer as the soft music filled the air. "I've known your work for a long time. I've followed your projects since university." "Really?" Marcia felt a wave of pleasure she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Your Hopewell Village project inspired me when I was starting the company. I always wanted to meet you, but you disappeared from the scene." Marcia's smile faded slightly. "Life sometimes takes us down different paths than we plan." Daniel noticed the melancholy in her voice and didn't press the matter. Instead, he spun her gently and said, "Perhaps it's time to return to the path that truly matters." Across the room, Edward watched every movement of the dance, every smile from Marcia, every intimate gesture between her and Daniel. A dull anger began to form in his chest. How dared that man touch his wife in that way? How dared Marcia smile at another man as she never smiled at him? The music ended, but Daniel didn't immediately release Marcia's hand. "How about we continue this conversation somewhere else? I know a quiet bar nearby." Marcia instinctively looked around, searching for Edward. He was still, in the same spot, surrounded by the same flatterers, completely absorbed in his business conversations, as always. "Why not?" she said, surprising herself. They discreetly headed for the exit, but Edward saw them. For the first time in his life, he abandoned a business conversation mid-sentence to follow someone. His steps were firm and determined as he crossed the room, but when he reached the main door, they had already disappeared. Edward stood on the pavement of Kensington for long minutes, under the fine drizzle falling over London, trying to understand what was happening to him. The man who controlled courts and shaped corporate destinies was completely lost at the possibility of having lost something he didn't even know he still wanted. In the intimate bar Daniel knew, a jazz club in Mayfair, Marcia found herself talking about her abandoned dreams, about the architect she had been and who she might become again. Daniel listened to her with an attention she had forgotten. Felt so good. "Why did you stop?" he asked, genuinely intrigued. Marcia hesitated. How to explain the loneliness of a marriage that was more of a social contract? How to talk about the gradual way she had lost her own identity? "Sometimes life asks us for sacrifices," she finally said, "and when we realize it, we no longer know who we were before." Daniel gently covered her hand with his. "It's never too late to remember." The touch sent an electric current through Marcia's arm. It had been so long since she felt the skin of someone who truly saw her, who truly cared about what she thought and felt. They talked until the bar closed. Daniel spoke about his professional journey, about how he had built his company from scratch with the determination to make a difference in people's lives through social architecture. Marcia spoke about her old projects, about the communities she had helped transform, about the dreams she kept tucked away. When they finally said goodbye at the bar door, Daniel gently held her face in his hands. "Marcia, I know you're married. I know this is all complicated, but I can't pretend tonight didn't happen. You are extraordinary." He kissed her softly, a kiss that carried all the tenderness and admiration she hadn't received in years. Marcia allowed herself to feel, allowed herself to be desired for who she truly was, not for what she socially represented. When she arrived home, it was past 2 in the morning. Edward was waiting for her in the living room, still wearing his event suit, with an expression she had never seen before. "Where were you?" His voice was dangerously calm. "At the event. Then I went to discuss projects with a potential client." It wasn't exactly a lie. Edward approached slowly, and Marcia could feel the tension emanating from him like heat waves. "What kind of projects are discussed until 2 in the morning, Marcia?" She straightened up, meeting his eyes. "The kind of project you never bothered to know about, Edward." It was the first time in 15 years that she had openly challenged him. Edward remained silent for long seconds, processing this version of Marcia he didn't know. "I'm trying to understand," he finally said, "when my wife turned into a stranger." Marcia laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "I didn't turn into anything, Edward. You just never bothered to know who I really am." She went up to the bedroom, leaving Edward alone in the living room for the first time since they got married, questioning if he really knew the woman with whom he shared a life. The days following the event at the Grand Hyatt brought an unprecedented stir to Marcia's life. For the first time in years, she woke up with anticipation, checking her phone for the messages Daniel sent daily. They were thoughtful but affectionate texts, always accompanied by articles on sustainable architecture or photos of interesting projects he found. "Good morning, brilliant architect. I saw this project in Copenhagen and thought of you," read one message, accompanied by a photo of a residential building with integrated vertical gardens. Edward noticed the change. Marcia hummed. During breakfast, smiled at her phone, and seemed to have regained an energy he hadn't seen in years. At first he felt satisfied, thinking that perhaps she was finally adapting to the life he offered her. But when he caught her talking animatedly on the phone on the balcony, and she abruptly ended the call upon seeing him, an uncomfortable suspicion began to grow. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Sandra. About the projects," Marcia replied quickly, putting her phone in her bag. It wasn't true. Daniel had called to invite her to visit a plot of land in Richmond Hills where he planned to build a sustainable residential complex. He wanted her professional consultation, he said, but both knew it was much more than that. 2 days later, Marcia found herself lying for the second time. She told Edward she was going to the mall with Sandra, but in reality she was driving her Range Rover towards Richmond Hills, where Daniel was waiting for her on a plot of land surrounded by eucalyptus trees with views of the Chiltern Hills. "What do you think?" he asked, pointing to the area where he intended to build. Marcia walked the land, her hands tracing invisible shapes in the air as she visualized possibilities. The dormant architect within her fully awakened. "You could take advantage of the natural slope to create terraces that integrate with the landscape," she said, excited. "And if we orient the buildings to capture the prevailing winds—" Daniel watched her, fascinated. Marcia's passion for architecture was contagious, transforming her entire demeanor. She gesticulated, explaining concepts of bioconstruction and energy efficiency with an enthusiasm that hypnotized him. "You have to go back to work," he said suddenly, interrupting her explanation. "It's a crime to keep so much talent hidden." Marcia stopped talking, reality returning like a bucket of cold water. "Daniel, my life is complicated. It's not that simple." He approached, taking her hands in his. "Why did you marry him, Marcia? With all due respect, you seem incompatible." It was the question she had asked herself for years. Edward had courted her intensely soon after the awards ceremony where they met. He was powerful, confident, offered a stability that a girl from the East End had never imagined having. Initially, she interpreted his seriousness as maturity, his reserve as elegance. She only realized too late that behind the impressive facade lay an emotional void that no amount of money or status could fill. "I was very young," she finally said. "I thought admiration and gratitude were enough to build a marriage." "And now?" Marcia looked at Daniel. He was everything Edward wasn't: warm, interested in her thoughts, capable of laughing, of being moved, of treating her as a person. She felt a wave of desire she hadn't experienced in years. "Now I don't know anything anymore," she whispered. Daniel gently caressed her face. "May I kiss you again?" This time, Marcia didn't hesitate. The kiss was more intense than the first, laden with an emotional hunger repressed for years. His hands wrapped around her waist, hers got lost in his masculine hair. There, surrounded only by eucalyptus trees and the singing of birds, she allowed herself to feel alive for the first time in 15 years. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. "Marcia," Daniel began, but she placed a finger on his lips. "Don't say anything. Just let me feel this for a moment." They spent the afternoon walking the land, planning the project that would be the synthesis of both their architectural dreams. Daniel spoke about his vision for responsible social construction. Marcia contributed technical ideas and aesthetic concepts. It was the professional and personal partnership she had always dreamed of having. As evening fell, they went to dinner at a discreet restaurant in the area. The conversation flowed naturally between projects, travels, books, dreams. Daniel had lived 3 years in Norway studying green architecture. Marcia had always dreamed of seeing Danish social housing projects. "When we finish the Richmond Hills project, we'll travel together," he said, taking her hand across the table. "I want to show you the self-sustaining houses of Bergen." Marcia felt her heart race. The possibility of a different life unfolded before her like a luminous dream, but the reality of her marriage was a constant shadow. "Daniel, this is a beautiful dream, but no buts. Life is too short to waste with people who don't see us, Marcia. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you represent." They left the restaurant hand in hand, and Daniel walked her to her car. The goodbye kiss was long and promising. "Tomorrow I want to show you some sketches," he said. "Can we meet at my office?" Marcia nodded, already anticipating their next meeting. On the way back home, a dangerous euphoria took hold of her. She turned on the car radio and sang along to the music as she hadn't in years. She felt beautiful, desired, professionally fulfilled. In the rearview mirror, she didn't notice the black Honda Civic following her from the restaurant. Edward was waiting for her again when she arrived, but this time he wasn't in the living room. He was in his study with several documents scattered on the table and a somber expression on his face. "Marcia, I need to talk to you." His tone was different, more grave, more dangerous. "About what?" she asked, trying to sound natural. "About Daniel Foster." The name hit Marcia like a punch. Edward knew. "I received an anonymous tip today about irregularities in Foster Construction's tenders," Edward continued, carefully observing his wife's reactions. "They seem to involve social housing projects. Exactly the type of project you have expertise in." Marcia felt her blood run cold. "Edward, I don't understand." "You don't understand." He stood up, approaching her like a predator. "Marcia, you are being investigated for participation in a public tender manipulation scheme. Your name appears in federal police reports." "That's impossible." Her voice came out sharper than normal. "I haven't worked in years. How could I?" Edward placed a folder on the table. "These are emails exchanged between you and Daniel Foster in the last 6 months, discussing specific projects that were later approved in tenders won by his company." Marcia opened the folder with trembling hands. There were printouts of emails she had never sent, with her digital signature, discussing technical details of projects she genuinely knew. The dates of the emails corresponded exactly to the days she had met Daniel. "Edward, these emails are fake. I never wrote that." "Marcia," his voice was dangerously calm, "you've been lying to me for weeks, meeting secretly with a man who is now being investigated for corruption, and you want me to believe it's a coincidence?" Marcia's legs gave way. She sat heavily in the chair, trying to process the information. Someone was framing her and Daniel, but who? And why? "Who submitted this complaint?" she asked. "I cannot reveal that, but Marcia—" Edward knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. It was the first time he had touched her with affection in months. You need to understand the gravity of the situation. We're talking about a federal crime, prison, jail. Marcia's eyes filled with tears. Edward, I swear by all that is sacred that I did none of this. Then why were you meeting secretly with him? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Marcia looked at her husband, the powerful and respected man who could protect her or destroy her with equal ease. How to explain that she had found in Daniel everything she lacked in her marriage? How to confess that for the first time in years she felt like a woman, not just the wife of the court president? Edward, she began, but her courage failed her. Marcia, I can protect you. I can make this investigation disappear. But I need to know the truth. Her phone rang at that moment. It was Daniel. Edward looked at the screen with an icy expression. Answer it, he ordered. With trembling hands, Marcia answered. Marcia, where are you? I've been trying to call for hours. Daniel's voice sounded desperate. Search and seizure warrants arrived at the office today. They're saying you and I... Daniel, she interrupted, seeing Edward watching her every word. I can't talk right now. Marcia, they've faked our emails. Someone is framing us. You need to... She hung up the phone abruptly. Edward held out his hand. Give me your phone. Edward, please. Marcia, the phone. She handed over the device, watching as Edward turned it off and put it in the locked drawer of his desk. For your own safety, he said, any contact with Daniel Foster from now on could be interpreted as obstruction of justice. That night, Marcia stayed awake until dawn, looking out the bedroom window at the city beginning to wake up. She felt trapped between two impossible realities, the suffocating security of a loveless marriage and the luminous but dangerous possibility of a new life alongside Daniel. She had no idea that in another apartment in the city, Prosecutor Helen Vickers was finishing reviewing the documents that would destroy both Marcia and Daniel, and by extension, the man she had been trying to bring down for years, Edward Montrose. The plan was perfect. Use his wife to get to the husband and destroy both in the process. The next morning, Marcia would wake up to find her photo plastered in the Times newspaper next to Daniel under the headline, Corruption Scheme Involves Court President's Wife. The war had just begun. The photo in the Times newspaper was devastating. Marcia appeared next to Daniel leaving the restaurant hand in hand, under a headline that instantly transformed her from a respectable woman into a suspect of federal corruption. The article, signed by investigative journalist Carla Morrison, detailed an alleged millionaire scheme involving fraudulent tenders for social housing projects. Edward read the article 3 times before going up to the bedroom where Marcia was still sleeping. When he woke her, showing her the newspaper, she turned livid. My God, she whispered, recognizing the photo someone had secretly taken. Edward, I can explain. You don't need to, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, with an expression she couldn't decipher. I already knew. Marcia sat up abruptly. You already knew. Marcia, I'm a court president. Did you think I wouldn't notice when my own wife started sneaking out and lying about where she was? His voice was strangely calm, almost resigned. Marcia expected shouting, accusations, perhaps even violence, but Edward merely sighed, deeply. The issue now isn't what you feel for him, he continued. The issue is that someone is using you to get to me, and I'm going to find out who it is. In the weeks that followed, Marcia's life became a nightmare. Reporters camped outside their building. Her few friends stopped answering her calls. Edward's family, always cold, now treated her with open contempt. Worse still, she was forbidden from any contact with Daniel, who was also facing his own legal battle. The investigation moved quickly. The Federal Prosecution Service, led by the ambitious Helen Vickers, presented evidence after evidence. Detailed emails, financial spreadsheets, even phone recordings that seemed to incriminate her definitively. Most disturbing was the precision of the data. Whoever was framing her intimately knew both her life and Daniel's projects. Dr. Robert Sterling, the criminal lawyer Edward hired to defend Marcia, was pessimistic. Miss Stone, I'll be frank, the evidence is very solid. We have emails with your digital signature confirmed by forensics, bank transfers linking you to the questioned projects, and 3 witnesses willing to swear they saw you discussing tender details. Marcia shook her head in desperation. Dr. Sterling, I swear I never sent those emails. I never received money from anyone. I know you believe that, but in court, what matters is what we can prove, not what we know to be true. Edward, who had watched the meeting in silence, finally spoke. What's the maximum sentence? 15 years. And as the wife of a magistrate, it will certainly be exemplary. 15 years. Marcia felt the world collapse, all because of a few innocent meetings with a man who made her feel alive again. The first hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in September. The Royal Courts of Justice in London were surrounded by journalists and curious onlookers. Marcia arrived arm in arm with Edward, who made a point of publicly demonstrating support for his wife, although his motivations were too complex for her to decipher. Helen Vickers was an impressive woman, 48 years old, a graduate of King's College London Law School, specializing in crimes against public administration. She had built her reputation by bringing down corrupt politicians and powerful businessmen. She was also, though few knew it, secretly in love with Edward Montrose for over 20 years, ever since their university days when he had scorned her for a prettier colleague. Your Honor, Helen said to the judge during her initial statement, what we have here is not just a case of corruption. It is a demonstration of how power can corrupt even those who should be guardians of justice. Marcia felt every word like a dagger. Beside her, Edward remained impassive, but his clenched jaw revealed the tension. The evidence presented by the prosecution was devastating. Emails where Marcia allegedly offered privileged information about tenders in exchange for percentages on contracts. Spreadsheets showing payments disguised as consulting fees. Even a phone recording where a female voice very similar to hers discussed values with Daniel. That's not my voice, Marcia whispered to Dr. Sterling. I know, he replied softly, but it's very well done. It will be difficult to prove. The most devastating moment came when Helen presented to the court a series of photos of Marcia and Daniel's meetings, not just the dinner that had appeared in the newspaper, but dozens of other images. The meeting on the land in Richmond Hills, conversations in cafes, even the kiss they exchanged, surrounded by eucalyptus trees. As you can see, Helen said, pointing to the photos projected on the screen, these were not casual professional meetings. It was an intimate and prolonged relationship, where sensitive information was certainly shared. Marcia felt the weight of everyone's gaze in the room. Edward, beside her, breathed heavily. It was the first time he had seen visual proof of the emotional betrayal he suspected. When it was her turn to testify, Marcia tried to explain the truth. She spoke about her passion for architecture, about how she had met Daniel at the event, about the innocent nature of their meetings. Mrs. Montrose, Helen interrupted during the interrogation, do you want this court to believe that you secretly met a businessman by pure coincidence? That you lied to your husband out of love for architecture? I lied because... Marcia hesitated, looking at Edward. How to explain that she lied because her marriage was an emotional desert? Because I knew he wouldn't approve of my return to work, or because you knew he would discover the corrupt scheme you were participating in? No, I never participated in any scheme. Helen smiled coldly. Then how do you explain that all the projects discussed with Daniel Foster were subsequently approved in tenders won by his company? Coincidence? Marcia had no answer for that. It was exactly what she couldn't understand. The most devastating day came when 3 witnesses took the stand. The first was an employee of Foster Construction who swore he had seen Marcia and Daniel analyzing tender documents at the company's office. The second was a waiter from the restaurant where they had dinner who said he had overheard conversations about percentages and commissions. The third was the most impactful, Sandra, her former partner and best friend. Sandra, Helen said, do you know Marcia Montrose well? I've known her for 20 years. We've been partners since university. And did you know about her relationship with Daniel Foster? Sandra looked at Marcia with tears in her eyes. I tried to warn her that she was making a mistake. What kind of mistake? Marcia approached me asking for information about public tenders. She said she had a friend interested in participating in bids. She offered money for the information. The judge's gavel struck several times to quell the commotion in the room. Marcia looked at Sandra in complete shock. Her best friend, the person she trusted most in the world, was blatantly lying. "Sandra," Marcia shouted, standing up. "Why are you doing this? I never—" "Order in the court." The judge was red with anger. "The defendant will sit down immediately or be removed." Marcia sat down, tears streaming down her face. Edward watched her with an indecipherable expression. That night at home, Edward finally exploded. 15 years, Marcia. 15 years of marriage, and you destroy me because of an adventurer. Edward, I swear I didn't do any of this. Someone is framing... Framing? He laughed bitterly. Marcia, I saw the photos. I saw you kissing another man. How can I believe anything else you say? It was... The first time she saw him show real emotion, anger, hurt, betrayal, feelings he had kept hidden for weeks finally exploding. "You want to know the truth about why I was meeting with Daniel," she shouted back. "Because he saw me. Because when he talked to me, he actually listened. Because for years you've treated me like an expensive piece of furniture instead of your wife." Edward was silent for long seconds. "And that justifies destroying my career. My reputation. I didn't destroy anything, I just—" Marcia stopped, realizing she couldn't explain without admitting she had fallen for another man. "Just what, Marcia?" "Just tried to remember what it was like to be happy," she whispered. Edward turned his back and went up to his study, where he spent the entire night on the phone with lawyers and political contacts, trying to minimize the damage the scandal was causing to his own career. The turnaround came unexpectedly. Dr. Sterling called on a Thursday morning, his voice altered by excitement. "Miss Stone, you need to come to the office immediately. We've discovered something important." At the office, Dr. Sterling introduced her to a short, nervous man. "This is Julian Sanders, her cybersecurity specialist. Tell her what you discovered." Julian opened a laptop and showed a series of technical analyses. "Ms. Stone, all the emails supposedly sent by you were created using a very sophisticated falsification program. The digital signatures were cloned, but they left traces in the source code." "What does that mean?" Marcia asked, barely daring to hope. "It means that someone with access to very advanced equipment systematically falsified your electronic correspondence. We are talking about organized crime, not simple corruption." Dr. Sterling leaned forward. "More importantly, we found out who financed this operation." He placed a folder on the table. Inside there were bank records showing transfers from a shell company to accounts belonging to Sandra, the Foster construction employee who testified against Marcia, the waiter, and even the expert who performed the forensic analysis on the fake emails. "Someone paid over £2 million to set up this scheme," Dr. Sterling said, "and we know who." He showed the final document. The shell company belonged to a conglomerate controlled by Helen Vickers and her husband, businessman Richard Vickers. The prosecutor. Marcia could barely believe it. But why would she do that? Dr. Sterling hesitated. "Ms. Stone, Helen Vickers has been in love with your husband for 20 years. She didn't just want to destroy you. She wanted to destroy your marriage to have a chance with him." Marcia felt a wave of nausea. Her entire life had been destroyed by a woman obsessed with Edward. "We have to take this to the judge immediately," she said. "It's not that simple. Helen is still the prosecutor on the case. We need a more careful strategy." That's when Edward entered the office without warning. It had been a long time since Marcia had seen him like this. Disheveled hair, crumpled suit, red eyes from insomnia. "Dr. Sterling called me," he said. "Is it true?" Dr. Sterling nodded and showed all the evidence to Edward. As he read the documents, his expression changed from disbelief to rage. "This woman destroyed my wife out of obsession," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "Edward," Marcia said softly, "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I never—" "I know," he interrupted, surprising her. "I always knew you weren't capable of this. I was just too angry to admit it." It was the first time in months that he looked at her with affection. "What are we going to do?" Marcia asked. Edward straightened up, and for the first time, Marcia saw the powerful man he truly was. We're going to tomorrow's hearing and expose everything. Helen Vickers destroyed my wife's life. Now it's my turn to destroy hers. The hearing that was supposed to be Marcia's final ordeal turned into the most talked-about spectacle of the British legal year. Edward arrived at the court with a voluminous folder and an expression that made experienced lawyers shiver. When the judge announced that there were new elements to be presented, Helen Vickers turned pale. "Your Honor," Edward said, rising with the authority of someone who had commanded courts for decades, "I request permission to present evidence proving that this accusation is the result of a criminal conspiracy orchestrated by the prosecution service itself." The commotion in the room was immediate. Helen tried to protest, but Edward was already handing the documents to the judge. "These are bank transfers, proving payments from Vickers and Associates to all the witnesses who testified against my wife. Here are the technical analyses, proving that the emails were falsified using military intelligence software. And this," he said, holding up a document, "is a private investigation report showing that prosecutor Helen Vickers has maintained a personal obsession with me for 20 years. Helen stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to expose the truth?" Edward interrupted her with glacial coldness. "Helen, you falsified evidence, bribed witnesses, and destroyed the life of an innocent woman. Why? Because she was married to me?" The room plunged into absolute silence. Helen looked at Edward with a mixture of panic and something that could be interpreted as desperate love. "Edward," she whispered, "you don't understand. I did this because I love you. For 20 years I've—" "You didn't do this out of love," he retorted with contempt. "You did it out of sick possession, and you destroyed 2 lives in the process." The judge interrupted the exchange. "Prosecutor Vickers, these documents are extremely serious. I will request an immediate investigation by the Public Prosecutor's Office into your conduct." Within 2 hours, Helen Vickers was escorted from the court in handcuffs, crying uncontrollably and shouting declarations of love for Edward. The charges against Marcia were dropped, Daniel was released, and the scandal exploded in national headlines. But the judicial victory did not bring the relief Marcia expected. The story took on epic dimensions in the press. Obsessed prosecutor frames magistrate's wife. Scandal of love and revenge shakes the judiciary. Innocent woman nearly imprisoned due to another's obsession. Marcia woke up every day with journalists at her door, TV cameras vying for angles to film her, helicopters hovering over the building. Her photo was in every newspaper, magazine, and website. Some portrayed her as a heroine, others as a femme fatale who had almost destroyed a powerful marriage. "I can't leave the house anymore," she told. Edward one particularly difficult morning, watching the crowd of reporters from the window. Edward, who had spent the last few days managing his own image and career crisis, looked at his wife with genuine concern. The scandal had also affected him. He had lost the chance to be nominated to the Supreme Court. Colleagues questioned his judgment in personal matters, and rumors about his emotional stability circulated in the corridors of power. "Marcia," he said softly, "I need to apologize to you." She looked at him surprised. Edward never apologized. "For everything," he continued, "for being an absent husband, for not noticing your unhappiness, for doubting you when you needed my support the most." Marcia felt her eyes well up with tears. "Edward." "No, let me speak. You were right when you said I treated you like an expensive piece of furniture. I hid behind work, power, status, and forgot that I had an extraordinary woman at home, a woman who deserved to be loved, not just kept." It was the most honest conversation they had had in 15 years of marriage. "I'm also to blame," Marcia said. "I fell for Daniel because he gave you what I didn't know how to give," Edward completed. "Attention, admiration, the feeling of being seen." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Dr. Sterling with worrying news. "Edward, I just got the news. Helen is in prison, but her lawyers are spreading rumors that Marcia really did have an affair, and that the evidence was planted by you to protect her. The press is starting to believe it." "What kind of rumors?" Edward asked, tense. They're saying you discovered her relationship with Daniel, got jealous and orchestrated the whole conspiracy to destroy them both. That Helen was just a convenient scapegoat. And there's more. People linked to her are offering money for intimate photos or compromising information about Marcia. Marcia, who had heard everything, felt the ground disappear beneath her. Edward, this is never going to end, is it? He hung up the phone and looked at her with determination. Yes, it will end. We're going to make it end. How? Leaving London. Leaving this madness behind until things cool down. Within 2 hours, Edward had everything organized. A private jet would take them to a property he owned on a private island off the Cornwall coast, England. A place even his lawyers didn't know existed. The journey was tense. Marcia felt guilty for destroying her husband's career. Edward struggled with complex feelings about her involvement with Daniel. When the helicopter finally landed on the island, both were physically and emotionally exhausted. The property was a paradise, a modern house among ancient palm trees, with views of crystal-clear waters that changed color with the light. There was no internet, television, or any connection to the outside world. Just the two of them, the sea, and the silence. In the first few days, they maintained a respectful distance. Edward worked when he could get a satellite signal. Marcia walked alone on the beach or read books from the house library. They dined together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The transformation began on the 4th night, when a tropical storm knocked out the house's power. Sitting by candlelight on the veranda, with the sound of rain and waves, Edward finally asked, "Did you love him?" Marcia hesitated. She knew the question would come, but she wasn't prepared for such honesty. "I was falling in love," she said at last, "but it wasn't just with him. It was with who? I became again when I was with him. The architect? The woman. The person who had opinions, dreams, ambitions. With Daniel, I remembered that I existed beyond being Edward Montrose's wife." Edward absorbed that in silence. "I fell in love with you," he said finally. "At the awards ceremony where we met. You explained a social project with such passion that it lit up the entire room. But after we got married, I didn't know how to handle that intensity. It was easier to keep you in the role of the perfect wife. Edward, I was afraid of you. Marcia, of your intelligence, your passion, your strength, because all those qualities reminded me of how emotionally limited I was." It was the first time she had seen him vulnerable. The powerful man who intimidated ministers and billionaires admitted to being afraid of his own wife. "I never wanted to hurt you," Marcia said softly. "I know. And I also know that if I had been the husband you deserved, Daniel Foster would never have had a chance." The confession hung between them like a bridge. Slowly, Marcia reached out and took his hand, the first physical contact in months that wasn't mere formality. "Can we start over?" she asked. Edward looked at their joined hands. "I don't know if I can forget the photos of him with you." "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking if we can build something new, something honest this time." The next morning, Edward surprised Marcia with breakfast on the beach, fresh fruit, coffee, and simple sandwiches. It was the first time in years he had done something domestic, something thoughtful. "Tell me about your dreams," he asked, "the real ones that you never shared with me." Marcia hesitated, then began to speak about sustainable architecture projects, communities she wanted to transform, international recognition she aimed for. Edward listened, truly listened, for the first time. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" he asked. "Because you never asked." That afternoon they walked together on the beach. Edward spoke about his fears, about the pressure of being a public figure, about how he had learned to hide emotions because weakness was not tolerated in his world. "I built such high walls," he said, "that I forgot how to let anyone in, including you." "Even now?" Edward stopped and faced her. "Especially now, because losing you taught me that power means nothing if you're alone." As the days passed, they began to rediscover each other. Edward revealed unexpectedly tender sides. He cooked for her, massaged her shoulders after their walks, told stories from his childhood. Marcia shared dreams, frustrations, and hopes. The turning point happened in the second week, when they were swimming at dusk, and Marcia finally broke down, all the fear, guilt, and exhaustion coming to the surface. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I destroyed everything, your career, our reputation, our life." Edward wrapped his arms around her in the water. "You didn't destroy anything that wasn't already broken," he said firmly. "Our marriage was broken long before Daniel appeared. We just didn't want to admit it. But how do we fix it now? By starting over, by being honest, by hiding nothing." That night, they made love for the first time in almost 2 years. It wasn't ardent or desperate. It was tender, careful, full of apologies, acceptance, and cautious hope. Afterwards, lying listening to the sea, Edward whispered, "I want to get to know you again, the real you. Will you let me?" "Yes," Marcia replied, and for the first time in months she believed they might find their way back to each other. Their return to London 2 months later was like coming back to a completely different world. The city remained the same, but Marcia and Edward had transformed. The two who left as wounded strangers returned as allies, as true partners for the first time in 15 years of marriage. Dr. Sterling was waiting for them at the airport with important news. "Things have changed a lot while you were away," he said during the drive home. "Helen Vickers was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 2 of her accomplices were also arrested, and public opinion has completely turned in your favor." Edward looked out the car window, observing the city where he had built his career. "And what about my position at the court?" "Ah, about that, we have great news. The National Judicial Council conducted a full investigation and concluded that your conduct was not only ethical, but exemplary. You sacrificed your own professional advancement to protect your wife and expose corruption. They are offering you the presidency of the new Specialized Financial Crimes Tribunal." Marcia squeezed Edward's hand. It was an even more prestigious position than his previous one. "And there's more," Dr. Sterling continued. "Daniel Foster is waiting to speak with you. He wants to offer Marcia something." That afternoon, Daniel arrived at Dr. Sterling's office, accompanied by his own legal team. He was thinner, with grey hairs he hadn't had before, but his eyes remained kind when he looked at Marcia. "Marcia," he said, standing up when she entered, How can I apologize for everything you went through because of me?" "Daniel, you were also a victim," Marcia replied gently. "Helen destroyed our lives." Edward watched the interaction carefully. He still felt a pang of jealousy, but he also recognized that Daniel genuinely cared for Marcia in a way that was neither possessive nor destructive. "In fact," Daniel said, "I called this meeting because I want to do something to make amends. My company is launching a new affordable housing project in 5 British cities. I want you to lead the architecture team." Marcia's eyes widened. "Daniel, I can't—" "It's all completely legitimate," he interrupted her. "An entire team of lawyers overseeing everything, total transparency, and you would be perfect for this. It's exactly the kind of social architecture you've always dreamed of." Edward could see the excitement on Marcia's face. After months of being treated as a victim or a criminal, someone was offering her the chance to return to the work she loved. "What do you think?" Daniel asked, looking from Marcia to Edward. "Obviously, I'll understand if the answer is no, but professionally speaking, there's no one more qualified." Edward cleared his throat. "Daniel, can I speak with you privately?" The 2 men went to a meeting room next door. Edward closed the door and faced the man who had almost stolen his wife. "I need to ask you something," Edward said. "Do you still feel something for Marcia?" Daniel was silent for a long moment. "I won't lie to you, Edward. I developed strong feelings for her. She is an extraordinary woman. But what I feel doesn't matter anymore now. It doesn't matter. She chose you. Even after everything that happened, even when she could have left during the scandal, she stayed. And more importantly, I could see, during the few moments we had, how much she talked about you even when she was frustrated with your marriage." Edward absorbed that. "So you're offering her this job because she deserves it, because her talent shouldn't be wasted, and because, honestly, after what we both went through, I think we all deserve a chance to rebuild our lives the right way." Edward extended his hand. "Then I think it's a good opportunity for her." Daniel shook it, surprised. "You're okay with the idea of us working together?" "I'm okay with the idea of my wife pursuing her own dreams, and if that includes working with you, then I trust her judgment." When they returned to the main room, Marcia noticed that something had changed between the two men. "So?" she asked. "Accept the job," Edward said. "It's time for the world to see what a brilliant architect you are again." The months that followed were a period of intense reconstruction. Marcia threw herself into Daniel's project with all the passion that had been dormant for years. She travelled between London, Edinburgh, Cardiff, Manchester, and Bristol, developing affordable housing projects that would shelter thousands of families while maintaining aesthetic beauty and environmental sustainability. Edward, in turn, took on his new role with a renewed sense of purpose. The Specialized Financial Crimes Tribunal became a national model, and his reputation not only recovered, but reached new heights. More importantly, he began to actively support Marcia's career, attending inaugurations of her projects, promoting her work in professional circles. Their personal relationship also deepened. They established new routines, weekly date nights, small weekend trips every month, daily conversations about work and their dreams. Edward learned to ask questions and listen. Marcia learned to share her thoughts and feelings openly, instead of keeping them to herself. The real test came 6 months later, when an international architecture magazine featured Marcia's work on its cover in an article titled "Rising Phoenix, British Architect Transforms Social Housing." The article detailed not only her professional achievements, but also mentioned the scandal she had survived. "How do you feel reading this?" Edward asked at breakfast, watching her leaf through the magazine. "Strange," she admitted. "Part of me still can't believe we survived all that." "We did more than survive," Edward said. "We finally became a real couple." It was true. Their second chance as husband and wife was stronger than their first attempt had ever been. The call that would change everything again came on a Sunday morning in December. Dr. Sterling's voice sounded excited but serious. "Edward, I just got the news. They want to offer you a position on the Supreme Court." Edward almost dropped the phone. It was the position he had dreamed of for decades, the pinnacle of a legal career in Britain. "But there's a catch," Dr. Sterling continued. "They want confirmation that your personal life is stable. No new scandals, no drama." Edward looked at Marcia, who was reading in the garden outside. "My personal life has never been more stable." "Excellent. Because they also want to meet Marcia. They want to see that the two of you are a united team." The meeting with the Supreme Court justices was scheduled for January. Marcia was nervous. She would be evaluated not only as Edward's wife, but as a professional in her own right. "What if they think I'm a problem?" she asked Edward the night before. "Impossible," he replied, kissing her forehead. "You are my greatest asset." The meeting went better than expected. The justices were impressed not only with Edward's legal history, but also with Marcia's professional achievements and the dignified way she had faced the scandal. When they left the building, both knew Edward would get the position. That night, Edward suggested dinner at the same hotel where they had first seen each other years before, where Daniel had approached her to talk about architecture, where it all began. "Why here?" Marcia asked as they entered the elegant restaurant of the Grand Hyatt. "You'll see." They were seated at a table with a view of the London city lights. As they spoke about the future, Edward's new position, Marcia's expanding projects, their renewed marriage, Edward seemed increasingly nervous. Finally, when dessert arrived, he stood up and knelt beside the table. Marcia gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Marcia," Edward said, taking a ring box from his pocket, 15 years ago I married you because I thought you would complete my perfect life. I was young, arrogant, and didn't understand what marriage truly meant. Other restaurant patrons began to notice and watch. But now I know," he continued, "that marriage isn't about completing someone's life. It's about building a new life together. You taught me to be a better man, a better husband, a better human being. So I'm not asking you to marry me because I need you. I'm asking because I choose you. Every day for the rest of my life I want to choose you." Tears streamed down Marcia's face. "Edward." "Will you marry me again, Marcia?" Do you want to be my wife, not out of obligation or social expectation, but because we truly love each other?" "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as Edward placed the new ring on her finger, not replacing the old one but joining it, symbolizing their renewed commitment. 6 months later, on a beautiful Saturday in May, they held a second wedding ceremony on the same island where they had rediscovered each other. It was a small, intimate celebration. Only their closest family, Sandra, who had been forgiven after revealing she had been blackmailed by Helen, Dr. Sterling, and, surprisingly, Daniel, who attended with his new girlfriend, an environmental engineer. "Thank you," Marcia said to Daniel during the reception. "For what?" "For helping me remember who I was. Even if it almost destroyed everything, meeting you was the catalyst that forced Edward and me to face the truth about our marriage." Daniel smiled. "Perhaps sometimes we need to almost lose something to truly learn to value it." Edward approached, putting his arm around Marcia's waist. "Daniel, thank you for being so generous about everything." "Edward, you both deserve to be happy, and honestly, seeing you two together now, that's how a marriage should be." A year later, on the anniversary of their second ceremony, Marcia and Edward returned to the same beach where they had remarried. As they walked along the sand at dusk, Marcia suddenly stopped. "Edward," she said, placing her hand on her own belly, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her hand, then at her face, understanding immediately. Yes, we're having a baby." Edward lifted her and spun her in the air, both laughing and crying at the same time. When he put her back down, they stood there, still, watching the sun set over the ocean, hands intertwined, her other hand resting on the new life growing inside her. "Do you know what this means?" Edward said softly. "What?" "It means we're not just rebuilding our lives. We're creating a completely new life." As night fell over the island and the stars began to appear in the tropical sky, Marcia thought about the journey that had brought them there, the pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and the near destruction of everything they thought they knew about love and marriage. But also the forgiveness, the second chances, and the possibility of starting over when two people are willing to do the necessary work. Their story had begun with a man who ignored his wife until jealousy almost destroyed them both. But it ended with two people who learned to truly see each other, to choose love over convenience, to build something true from the ruins of something false. And now, with a new life growing inside her, Marcia knew that the greatest adventure of all was just beginning. Together, this time. Truly together.